Okay, so for this week we're going to keep looking at some of the other render options and ways we can make the materials. Well, the next one we need to focus on, we're going to need to go ahead and set up our render. So I'm going to hit the button up there, press F10, and I'm going to come all the way down here to the bottom, assign renderer. I'm going to hit my three dots, and I'm going to choose Arnold. Now, this should change almost everything, but if active shade down here doesn't change, we need to also make sure that's set to Arnold. Okay, so now I got all these new options and a new tab for Arnold that gives me a lot of new things I can do to increase quality. But for now, I'm going to say render, and obviously we just get a black screen, but it looks like it's doing what it needs to do. So, next up, let's go ahead and make just a handful of quick objects. Now I'm going to make a plane, and just for quality, I'm going to go ahead and give it a backdrop too. Doesn't need to necessarily be a perfect 90 degree, but just kind of a backdrop. I'll stick one there. And stick one over there. Just give me a nice little scene to put my stuff on. That'll be good. Alright, so now that I have this, just do some standard primitives. So, we got our stereotypical teapot. I'll throw in a torus in here. A sphere back there. Let's go with we'll go with a pyramid. Just a handful of different objects. So, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and hit render. And we will see something looks kind of like this. Now, in older versions of Arnold, things will come in and it'll just be completely black. Originally, if you didn't have a light dedicated to Arnold, everything would just be rough. But, that said, just this initial render, everything looks a lot higher quality than if, and I'm going to go ahead and just swap it back real quick, than if I did it all on Scanline. Scanline just looks a little flat, a little simple, but with Arnold, everything just looks higher quality. And you'll even notice some of those internal texturing edges that popped up right around here with the standard renderer are no longer doing it now. I'll let this finish up real quick. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and see what we can do with some of these new materials. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my material editor. And let's see what we have in here. Well, I'll maximize this for the moment. So over on the side we have the general materials, which has the physical ones, which isn't bad, but let's go ahead and see what Arnold has by expanding this. So in here we have a few different options. Simply put, the one we're going to need to take a look at is going to be surface. Now, under surface we have a few preset things in here, but the real basic general material for everything is going to be this, the standard surface. So I'll click and drag that out. And you'll see it has a lot of options just built into it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up just so we can see all the things in here. I'm also going to minimize this. Zoom out just a bit to see that. And I'm going to go ahead and just assign it to these objects. And I'm going to create another one to assign to the background and to the floor. So I got two of them in here, and just to keep things easy to see, I'm going to just quickly click this and change the color of the objects to that, just so I can see everything a little bit easier through this. Okay. So now that I have my difference on the colors, I'm going to take a look at this one first. So first off, I've got base color. Essentially, what we can do here is just crank this up to 1 so it'll hold this color. If it's a little bit less or even lower than that, you can kind of see here it'll darken and not take that full color. It was at a 0.8, which is just a little bit dimmer than what we'd want, but I'm going to bring it up to this. Now, I could change colors for this, but I'm going to leave it kind of this pale white background. If I wanted to add something else, I can click in here and go to things like a bitmap. For the most part, I don't want to worry about that for now. And you'll see we can do it on the other side too, but we'll talk about that here in a bit also. So I'm going to hit render just to see. Okay, pretty simple background, nothing too crazy about it. So let's actually focus on the objects instead. So I'll zoom back in. Get something about like this, just so when I hit render, I'll really only get the objects in the walls. Alright, good. I'll cancel that. And let's see what we can do. So going into this one, I'm going to do the same thing as before and just max that out so it'll keep this color. But one other thing we're going to do just to make all of this a little bit easier for us, we're going to come up here. Now, depending on your options and your version, you might see this, but I'm going to click and hold on this. I'm going to come down and change it to this one that looks like the little play button. This is our active shade renderer, and essentially every little change we make will automatically re-render and update. Now, for simple objects like what we have, this isn't bad, but if we have something a little bit more complex, if we got a lot more objects, a lot more of things with reflections or waters or particles, it's going to keep working on it and it can make this slow down real bad. So we need to be careful of that. But with this, we can go through and see some of the options and things that we can do. So I'm going to go with, I'm going to go with this kind of darker blue. That'll be fine. So in here, we have a few options, and we're only going to take a look at a handful of them to start with. But the first one I want to take a look at is going to be this one, the specular. So we all know how this works. Essentially for the specular, it gives it the more shine, more kind of reflection. We can see it reflected there, in the object, whether we want a lot of it, a little of it, or kind of any at all. Specular basically makes it glossy or metallic, kind of just depending on your options. Next to that, though, we have a color option where we could go through and choose what color we want reflected. More often than not, this is going to be left as white, but if we are trying to work with different light combinations, or if we have a colored light, we would want this to reflect that colored light instead. Over here, though, we also have roughness. And roughness, and we can kind of see, and the active shade's a little bit slow to see it, but we can also see it here on the objects. The smaller this number, the bigger spread of the light of what it's going to want to do. Or at least that's the theory behind it. Some of the objects, and depending on the other settings in here, specifically this one, IOR, which we'll talk about here in just a second, will change a lot about how this spread works and how much we want there to be. That said, if we spread it too much, we can actually lose a lot of it just because of how much it's actually spreading it out. So finding a nice balance is good. The next option we have here is metalness, which if I crank up, is kind of a rough way to work around it, but it is a way to just quickly give something some appearance of looking like metal. So right now, I kind of have this blue painted brassy look to it, but I can change that depending on how I want this roughness to go, because now if I bring it down, it's spreading it less and making it more chrome-ish, just because it's spreading it out more and more. So with a low roughness and a high metalness, I kind of get this chromy blue colored look. And you see it working for everything. After that, I have this, IOR, which essentially is going to calculate how the reflections and everything are going to look. So I'm going to bring this down. And this number means a few different things, kind of just depending on what it is you are trying to achieve. Now, the IOR itself really needs better lights than what we have in here. These default basic ones that are just in the scene aren't going to necessarily give us everything we want. So we're going to come back to that here in just a moment, but I'm also going to go ahead and open up my render settings just so we can see a few other options we have in here. So I'm going to go to the Arnold renderer itself. Now, in here we can see quite a few different options. Well, first with the preview and then the camera. Essentially, what I want to do with this is increase these numbers just a little bit. And every time I do, it's going to rework the quality similar to what we saw in art before. It'll slow down the renderer, but it will increase the quality as it keeps working. Now, with the active shade, it's not always going to be the best, or at least it might not seem like it. So we may need to go back here to actually try to render it out and see how the quality looks like this. While active shade is very good, it doesn't quite build the same quality that we would expect to get with something like this renderer here. But we can go through and increase the quality here, and you can see that it's going to stack up very, very fast. Especially when it starts multiplying things based on each of these different attributes. Now the transmission here, this is the one that's going to actually affect that IOR, but we will come back to that again here in just a moment. So I'm going to let this render out, and then we will keep talking. Okay, so overall, pretty good. Sorry about this. Get rid of that. So, we can see that everything came through pretty well. Now, obviously, the poly count on here, edges, it looks a little rough in terms of just the models themselves. But ignoring that, the quality of the render came out overall pretty well. So let's see what we can add into by adding some lights to our scene. Now, as I said before, newer versions of Arnold don't need you to create lights for them to work, but things will be better if we do go ahead and create some new lights to work with everything in here anyway. So, I'm going to go to Create tab, Lights, and I'm going to come down and choose Arnold. And you see there's only actually one option for this. Well, I'm going to choose that, and this is going to work kind of like a target spotlight. So I'm going to take it and drop the target kind of about here, just in the middle of everything. And I can choose and move this, and you'll see that the light itself is working with a bit of a plane. So let's do a quick render just to see kind of how it looks. Well, obviously, I don't have a big, strong enough light, or maybe not even enough lights overall. But even with this being darker, we can see that the quality looks pretty good. So I'm going to cancel that, and just for the moment, to make things easier, I'm going to come back and drop these settings just to speed up everything for the render. Because if we can see how things look in here, we can then increase it, but until that, let's go ahead and just keep things a little more simple. So active shade, choose my light, and I can move this around, and as I do, it's going to rework the active shade and re-render everything we do. So this is really what we want for now. But let's go ahead and take a look into the modifiers for the light and just see how everything is. Alright. So in here we have a few different options. First off, we have the shape, and this is going to be the light itself. Right now it's working off of a quad system, but I can change this to actually project the light in different ways by changing the type here. Things like a point is going to be more or less our omni light. Distance is going to be more of just a, how's the way to put it, like a spotlight, but not a spot in terms of like an actual controlled spotlight like this. Think of distance as maybe more directional. Okay, then I got quad, which is going to try to do a bigger area and kind of just project everything evenly from this shape. We have disc, which is basically the same thing, but it's just a different shape to work with. And you'll note that we do get a few other options in here anyway. Let me go back to that. Okay. Cylinder, Skydome, Photometric, and Mesh. We're going to come back for the ones like Skydome here in a bit. But for the moment, let's go ahead and... Actually, I'm about out of time on this video, so I'm going to pause this, get this one uploaded, and then I will see you in the next one.